Summer 1943. The Texas sun burned through the air like a living thing, making the horizon shimmer and the sand curl into waves that looked almost alive. A convoy of olive-green buses rolled slowly along a dirt road that cut through the Brazos Valley, dust clouds rising behind like ghosts. Inside, 32 German women sat pressed against cracked leather seats, their uniforms faded and sweat-soaked. Some stared out the windows with hollow eyes. Others whispered prayers under their breath. The scent of engine oil mixed with perfume smuggled in coat pockets. Small attempts at dignity in a world that had stripped them of names and flags. When the buses stopped, the silence was enormous. Beyond the barbed wire fence lay a camp surrounded by endless fields of yellow grass and a handful of wooden barracks under a sun too wide to belong to Earth. A painted sign read Camp Hearne. The guards who waited were not what the women expected. No snarling faces, no barking dogs. Just sun-browned men in dusty hats, shirts rolled to their elbows, hands resting easily on their belts. Cowboys, real ones, grinning as if they'd stumbled onto the strangest rodeo in history. Frida Weber stepped off first. She was 23, a nurse from Hamburg whose hands still bore faint iodine stains from field hospitals. Her boots sank into red soil that felt like walking on another planet. Beside her, Annalise Koch adjusted her spectacles and muttered, "If this is hell, it smells oddly like breakfast." A cowboy tipped his hat. "Welcome to Texas, ladies. Mind the heat. It'll test your manners faster than your faith." His voice carried a teasing warmth that made several women exchange startled glances. Private Samuel Harlan stood apart, arms crossed, his eyes sharp beneath a straw hat. He'd been a rodeo rider before the war, fast, fearless, and fond of silence. Watching these women shuffle in a line, he saw exhaustion more than threat. He remembered what Sergeant Miles had said that morning. They expect chains. Give them saddles instead. The camp was modest. 5 barracks, a mess hall, a corral, and the sound of cicadas droning like distant machinery. The women were shown to their quarters, each given soap, a cot, and a cup of cold water. When Frida lifted the tin cup to her lips, her hands trembled. The water tasted of iron and forgiveness. She hadn't known either for months. That evening, they heard the first horse. A deep, rhythmic sound, hooves striking soil in measured patience. The women gathered by the window slats, watching as cowboys led a dozen chestnut and dapple-gray maras across the yard. For work, someone guessed. But the next morning, they were told something stranger. Sergeant Miles, tall and composed, addressed them in slow, careful English. "You'll help with ranch maintenance. We use horses here. You'll need to learn." Murmurs rippled through the group. Frida frowned, certain she'd misunderstood. Horses? Not barrows or shovels, but living creatures? A girl from Munich laughed too loud from disbelief. Miles only nodded toward the corral. Chains rust fast in Texas. Saddles last longer. The training began under the white eye of the sun. Horses snorted and stamped, wary of unfamiliar voices. Frida approached a pale mare named Willow, her heart pounding. Sam Harlan stood nearby, boots dusty, watching quietly. "Don't grab too quick," he said. "She'll think you're scared." Horses read fear better than words. Frida hesitated, then extended her hand slowly. The mare sniffed her fingers, soft breath like warm wind. Something in Frida shifted, small but undeniable. The world beyond barbed wire blurred into heat waves, and for the first time since capture, she felt a pulse of control. She wasn't being commanded. She was learning. When she finally mounted, awkward and tense, the saddle creaked and the whole camp seemed to hold its breath. Sam smiled. "See? Nothing to it but trust." Annalise, watching nearby, scoffed. "Trust is for fools." But her voice trembled. That night, she wrote in her journal, "They treat us like people. I'm afraid to like it." Days turned into a rhythm. Feeding horses, mending fences, hauling water. Work that burned muscles but soothed minds. The women began to laugh again, quiet and startled at first, like birds testing the air after a storm. Sam caught Frida humming once, a German lullaby nearly lost beneath the wicker of horses. He didn't understand the words, but the melody stuck to him like sunlight on skin. Rumors spread across the camp. Some guards worried it was too lenient, that kindness might breed rebellion. Others shrugged. Hard to hate someone once you've shared a saddle, Sam said to Miles. The sergeant nodded, but kept his eyes on the fence. Just remember, wars end, but stories stay. Make sure we tell the right one. Frida's transformation didn't go unnoticed. Where she'd once flinched at footsteps, she now walked taller, her braids swinging behind her as she worked. Yet guilt crept in like dusk. She'd dream of her brother fighting somewhere in Russia, of bombs over Hamburg, and wake up smelling horse sweat and mesquite trees. How could peace bloom here while her homeland burned? One afternoon, a dust storm rolled through, wind howling fierce enough to bend the fence posts. The horses panicked. Without thinking, Frida ran into the corral, covering her face with her scarf. Sam shouted, "Get back!" But she reached Willow first, grabbing the reins, whispering in German until the mare stilled. When the storm passed, both stood trembling, coated in dust. Sam walked over, eyes wide. That was either brave or foolish. She met his gaze. Maybe both. That night, thunder still grumbled on the horizon, but inside the barracks, the women talked softly, their voices weaving between languages. They spoke of home, of things they missed, and, hesitantly, of the strange gentleness of their captors. Annalise remarked, "It's the first war where the losers get taught how to ride." Laughter rippled, thin but real. Sam sat outside the barracks, listening to that laughter drift through the night air like music he didn't deserve. The stars stretched wide, merciless and bright. He thought about the order posted that morning. No personal contact beyond duty. He'd signed it. He'd even agreed. But he also knew rules couldn't corral what he saw in those women's eyes. The slow unfreezing of people learning not to be afraid. By the end of the week, Frida could saddle Willow without help. She'd stopped counting days since capture. When Sam handed her a canteen after another blazing afternoon, their fingers brushed. Just for a moment. The touch felt electric, like a spark in dry grass. She looked away quickly, but her cheeks betrayed her. Sam turned toward the horizon, pretending not to notice, yet his jaw tightened as if bracing against something he couldn't name. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint jingle of spurs and the distant bark of a coyote. The women led their horses back to the stables, silhouettes swallowed by the red dusk. Overhead, the camp's flag barely stirred, caught between two winds, two loyalties, two worlds that were supposed to be enemies. Frida paused by the fence, her hand resting on the wood. Beyond it stretched miles of wild, unguarded country, open, endless, terrifyingly free. For a heartbeat, she thought of running, not to escape, but to remember what it felt like. Then Willow nickered softly behind her, grounding her back to earth. She smiled faintly. Inside the guard tower, Sam watched her through binoculars. Miles joined him. "You think she'd try?" the sergeant asked. Sam shook his head. "No, sir. She's already where she wants to be." The camera would hold that moment. The woman by the fence, the cowboy in the tower, the sunset bleeding over Texas like spilled paint. Then, as the light fades, the narrator's voice lowers, measured, knowing. They came expecting chains, but found reins instead. And with every hoofbeat, the desert learned a new language, the sound of mercy speaking German. The Texas morning broke with a light that seemed to forgive everything. Mist hung low over the fields, and the horses shimmered like bronze ghosts in the dew. The German women emerged from their barracks, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, hair tied hastily, their grayish-hue shirts already clinging in the heat. Frida stood among them, watching Sam Harlan toss a saddle over his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "You'll start with the calm ones," he called, his accent stretching the words into music. "They're friendlier than the heat, anyway." The women exchanged looks, half amusement, half disbelief. Annalise muttered, "Where I'm from, horses were for officers." Frida smiled faintly. "Maybe we are officers now." Her humor was brittle, but the sound of it startled even her. She hadn't remembered what laughter felt like in months. The horses stamped, restless. Sam led Frida toward a chestnut mare with kind eyes. "She's Willow," he said. "She listens if you do." Frida hesitated, brushing dust from her sleeves. "In Hamburg, we didn't talk to animals." "Then that's why y'all lost the war," Sam teased lightly, and even Sergeant Miles cracked a grin from behind his clipboard. As Frida approached, Willow lowered her head. The horse's breath smelled of hay and summer. Frida raised a trembling hand, touched the velvet muzzle, and felt the world tilt. In that simple gesture, the war shrank. The camp shrank. For a second, there was only warmth, alive, patient, unjudging. By midday, the field shimmered with heat and new beginnings. The women tried to mount. Some fell, some cursed, some simply laughed. The cowboys didn't mock them. They guided, steady and calm. "Balance from the hips," Sam said, demonstrating not the hands. Frida watched carefully, mimicking his stance. When she finally found her rhythm, the saddle creaked like an old friend. Annalise called out, "If my mother could see this, she'd think I married a Texan." A burst of laughter followed, unthinkable days ago. The camp had been silent once. Now, it hummed with a strange music. Horses snorting, women shouting in broken English, cowboys replying in rough German, learned overnight. "Guten Morgen, Fräulein," they'd say, mispronouncing it with pride. And every time, the women smiled like they were remembering something they'd almost forgotten, humor. But beneath that laughter lay confusion. At night, when the camp fell quiet and cicadas sang, Frida wrote in her journal, "I don't understand them. They are our enemies. Yet they teach us gently, as if they've forgotten." She underlined the next words twice. Maybe mercy is more frightening than cruelty. Days blended into rhythm. The women cleaned stables, filled troughs, learned to mend fences with barbed wire, so fine it sliced fingers before it showed blood. And yet no one complained. Work was easier than waiting for news that never came. Sergeant Miles sometimes joined in, sleeves rolled high, his face unreadable. "Keep their hands busy, their minds stay calm," he told Sam. "But don't let kindness make you blind." Sam nodded, though he wasn't sure who the warning was for, the prisoners or himself. One afternoon, Frida guided Willow beyond the corral. The air rippled with heat. A hawk circled high above, and she thought, absurdly, of Berlin's bombers. Willow's ears twitched. Frida whispered something in German, a secret between them. From the fence, Sam watched, arms crossed, the ghost of a smile flickering. When she returned, he said, "You ride like you trust her." Frida tilted her chin. "And you, do you trust me?" He hesitated. "I reckon trust don't care what flag a person waves." That night, thunder rolled far off, a storm gathering over the plains. The women huddled under lantern light, sewing torn shirts and singing softly. The melody rose through the wooden beams, half prayer, half memory. Outside, Sam lingered near the door listening. When Annalise's voice broke, he almost stepped in, but didn't. Instead, he looked at the horses in their stalls, heads bowed, breathing steady. He realized he couldn't tell whether the captives or the animals looked freer. Then came the accident. A young woman named Marta, barely 20, fiery and reckless, tried to prove she could ride bareback. The horse bucked, throwing her hard into the dust. The women screamed. Sam ran, kneeling beside her. Her lip was split, her pride worse. "It's been okay," she insisted, stubborn tears mixing with dirt. Sam fetched a cloth anyway, pressing it gently to her face. "Next time," he said, "try asking the horse first." She laughed through the pain. "You sound like my father." Then maybe he was right. The story spread that night, how the American Guard had caught her, carried her, treated her like a daughter. It wasn't romance. It was something rarer, recognition. Humanity through dust and blood. The next morning, Sergeant Miles ordered them all to the corral. "You've done good work," he said, pacing slowly. "But remember, you're still prisoners. This ain't home." His tone was firm, but not cruel. Frida watched him closely. She could see the strain in his jaw, the way kindness cost him something. Afterward, Sam approached quietly. "Don't mind him," he said. "He's got to sound mean for Washington." Frida's lips curved. Then maybe Washington should come here and learn how to ride. That evening, when the sun lowered and the air turned soft, the women gathered for their daily exercise. They mounted their horses in unison, dust rising beneath hooves like smoke from a slow fire. Sam rode beside them, correcting posture, offering praise. When Frida guided Willow into a gentle trot, something inside her lifted, a lightness she hadn't felt since before the war. She wanted to cry but didn't know why. The weeks that followed blurred into a pattern of heat and learning. Letters arrived from Europe, some sealed, some blacked out by censors. Frida's bore one line, "Hamburg burns, but I am alive." She folded it carefully and hid it in her boot. Later that day, she rode faster than ever, as if outrunning grief itself. Sam tried to catch up, calling her name. She didn't stop until the horse did. When he reached her, breathless, she said quietly, "You can't imagine what ashes smell like." He looked at her for a long time. "No," he said softly, "but I know what forgiveness does." That night, under a sky soaked in stars, Frida sat outside the barracks. The camp was quiet except for the slow shifting of horses. Annalise joined her, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. "You think they pity us?" she asked. Frida shook her head. "No, I think they're teaching us how not to hate." A distant whistle sounded, the train line beyond the valley. Both women turned toward it instinctively. "Reminds you of home?" Annalise asked. "No," Frida whispered. "Reminds me that there still is one." Inside the stable, Willow shifted restlessly. Sam rose from his stool, sensing something he couldn't name, a change in the wind, a tightening of silence. He stepped outside, looking toward the women silhouetted against the pale moon. For a heartbeat, everything felt suspended. No war, no orders, just the fragile hum of peace trying to take root in impossible soil. Then the sky flashed with lightning, far on the horizon. The storm was coming again. Sam watched it roll in, slow and deliberate, and thought of what Sergeant Miles had warned him. Kindness changes people, Harlan, but it never comes without cost. He looked once more at the corral, where Willow stamped and snorted, restless as a conscience. Somewhere in the dark, Frida's laughter drifted faintly on the wind, brief, defiant, impossibly human. And as thunder cracked open the night, Sam realized the real battle had already begun, right here between mercy and fear. The summer deepened until even the air felt exhausted. The Texas sun no longer rose. It exploded each morning, bleaching the sky to white. By then, the women had grown strong, their hands calloused from rope and reins, their German accents softened by English dust. But something in the camp had shifted. The laughter that once spilled freely began to hush when footsteps approached. New officers had arrived from Fort Sam Houston, their uniforms pressed, their eyes sharp. They watched the camp with suspicion, jotting notes, whispering among themselves. "Too much freedom," one muttered. "They forget they're prisoners." The next morning, new signs were hammered into the fence posts. NO fraternization. Orders by command. The ink bled in the heat. Sergeant Miles read the order aloud to the guards, his voice tight. "We keep our jobs by following rules. That means no talking beyond instruction. No gifts. No smiles that last too long." His gaze found Sam Harlan, lingering there. Sam only nodded, jaw clenched. The news spread quickly. The women were told their riding sessions would be reduced. No more long hours in the open field. No more laughter drifting over fences. Frida took the announcement silently, but her eyes, once bright with defiance, dulled like cooled iron. When she entered the stables that evening, Willow nickered softly, sensing the tension. Frida pressed her forehead against the mare's neck. "They think we'll run," she whispered in German. "But where would I go?" Sam avoided her for days. Duty made a coward of him. When they crossed paths near the troughs, he spoke only of tools, feed, schedules, nothing human. It hurt her more than any chain. At night, the women gathered in their barracks, muttering about punishment, wondering if kindness had been a trap. Annalise wrote in her journal, "Freedom was a borrowed coat. They've taken it back before we could feel its warmth." Yet distance bred not resentment, but longing. The fence between captor and captive grew higher in their minds than in the field. And then came the day it nearly broke. A government inspector arrived. A man named Colonel Davis, stiff as starch, his metals polished to a blinding shine. He inspected the barracks, the kitchens, the horses. When he reached the corral, Frida stood among the herd, brushing dust from Willow's coat. Davis frowned. That woman. She's unsupervised? Sam stepped forward. She knows the horses better than anyone here, sir. Davis's lips curled. That's not her place. Get her back inside. Frida heard, straightened, and said softly, The horses don't understand borders, sir. The colonel's eyes flashed cold surprise. Nor should prisoners forget them. For a breath, the camp stilled. Sam met her gaze across the fence, a silent plea to stay silent. But Frida's shoulders squared. Maybe if men had listened to horses instead of orders, she said, there would be fewer fences in this world. Gasps rose. The colonel turned to Miles. Control your captives, Sergeant. That evening, new restrictions came down. All horse work suspended. The women confined to quarters until further notice. Miles signed the order with a heavy hand. They're scared, he told Sam. Scared of what mercy looks like. The horses sensed it first, the stillness, the loss of routine. They kicked and whinnied in their stalls. Without the women's gentle voices, the camp felt hollow. Days crawled. The wind carried dust through every crack. On the fifth night, a storm hit. Rain slammed against the roofs, wind tearing at the fences. Lightning lit the valley like camera flashes. In the chaos, part of the western fence collapsed with a scream of bending wire. Willow bolted, followed by two other Mares. Alarms sounded, guards shouting, flashlights cutting through rain. Frida woke to the commotion. Before anyone could stop her, she ran into the storm. Mud splashed up her legs, rain soaking her hair. Sam saw her silhouette darting through the dark and cursed under his breath. Frida! He shouted, chasing her into the downpour. The field was chaos. Horses panicked, lightning splitting the sky in white veins. Frida found Willow tangled near the broken fence, her reins caught in barbed wire. She dropped to her knees, hands bleeding as she pulled the strand apart. The horse thrashed wild-eyed. Easy, Madchen, easy, she whispered, voice trembling. Sam reached her side, grabbing the wire with bare hands. Together they freed the animal, both panting, drenched, their skins streaked with mud and blood. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the rain falling between them like confession. You could have been shot running out here, Sam said hoarsely. So could you, she answered. Then softer, maybe I'd rather die, saving something gentle. When the storm finally passed, dawn found them side by side in the corral, soaked to the bone, the horses calm again. Miles arrived with two guards taking in the wreckage. He saw the torn wire, the bleeding hands, the woman standing where she shouldn't have been. But instead of anger, his voice was quiet. You both saved this camp more than you know. He looked at the broken fence and sighed. Guess we'll rebuild it stronger. Sam turned to Frida. Or maybe lower, he murmured. For days afterward, rumors spread that the Germans had tried to escape. Others swore they'd stayed to protect the horses. The truth depended on who was telling it. But even the colonel couldn't ignore the report that not a single woman had run through the open gap. Life returned, but something fundamental had changed. The women were allowed back in the stables. No one mentioned the storm again, but everyone carried it in their eyes, a quiet knowing that fences could break and the world wouldn't end. Frida worked silently now, sleeves rolled, her hands scarred but steady. Sometimes Sam would pass her, their eyes meeting for half a second before turning away. It was enough. In that glance, everything unsaid lived. Fear, gratitude, and something dangerously close to trust. One evening near sunset, she stood by the mended fence, tracing the new wire with her fingertips. The metal was cold, but not unkind. Beyond it stretched open land, glowing gold in the dying light. She could almost hear the storm's echo, still whispering there. A reminder that boundaries, once tested, never quite hold the same power. From the watchtower, Sam watched her in silence, one hand on the rail, the other tightening around the binoculars. Behind him, Miles spoke softly. Storm season's not over. Sam nodded, eyes never leaving her. No, he said. It's just beginning. The wind picked up again, brushing through the grass like the memory of rain. The fence hummed faintly, alive with the tension between two hearts and two nations that had forgotten, for a moment, which side they stood on. Spring 1945 arrived like a long, held breath finally released. The war in Europe was ending. The word reached Camp Hearne in fragments, letters half burned by censors, radio whispers that sounded more like prayers than reports. The Texas fields shimmered with new grass, and the air smelled faintly of rain and horses. For 2 years the German women had lived between fences, learning to mend, to ride, to laugh again. Now the rumor spread like wildfire through the camp. They were going home. For Frida Weber, the news struck not with joy but unease. Home was a word she had long stopped using. It belonged to ruins and smoke, to streets she no longer trusted to remember her. Yet every morning, she watched the trains pass beyond the horizon and felt the old ache returning. The men loading their supplies spoke in hurried tones. Even the cowboys moved with quieter steps, as if they too were bracing for goodbye. Sam Harlan avoided the subject altogether. He worked longer hours, cleaning tack that didn't need cleaning, patching fences already straight. When Sergeant Miles caught him at it one evening, he only said, "You can't mend what ain't broken, Sam." Sam shrugged. "Maybe I just don't want it to end." Miles sighed, looking toward the barracks where the women's laughter drifted in faintly. It always ends. Question is, how you walk away from it. That night, Frida found herself at the stables again. The lantern light flickered, soft and golden. Willow turned her head as she entered, as if sensing her restlessness. Frida laid her palm against the mare's neck. "They say we leave in 2 weeks," she whispered. "Do you think Germany will even recognize me?" The horse blinked slowly, as if in answer. Outside, the wind rustled the fence wire, the same low hum she'd once feared and now found strangely comforting. The next morning, the colonel from Fort Sam Houston returned to finalize transport. He carried papers thick with orders and eyes that had never seen mercy as anything but weakness. "They'll depart by train to New York," he announced, "then by ship to Europe. Until then, minimal interaction with guards." His words dropped like stones. The camp grew colder instantly, the air drained of all the fragile warmth that had been built over months of quiet trust. But orders, like fences, had never stopped hearts from crossing. Frida and Sam still met in moments that belonged to no one. Passing water buckets, feeding horses, eyes meeting for just too long. One afternoon, while fixing the corral gate, Sam finally broke the silence. "When you go," he said, voice low, "don't forget Texas." She smiled faintly. "Texas forgets nothing. It's too big." His laugh was small but real. Then he said something he hadn't meant to. "I wish the war had lasted 1 year less." She turned, understanding exactly what he meant and exactly why he shouldn't have said it. Days passed. The women began packing. Folded clothes, photographs, scraps of life salvaged from captivity. Annalise, always the cynic, tried to joke. "At least we'll have stories to tell. The Americans taught us how to ride, how to live, and how to lose politely." But her voice wavered. For all her wit, she'd wept the night before, quietly, into her blanket. Then came the unexpected order from Sergeant Miles. The colonels approved a final send-off. "Tomorrow, at sunset, one last ride. Everyone mounts up, even the prisoners." The news spread through camp like wildfire. The women were stunned, disbelieving, then giddy. For a single day, the war seemed to hold its breath. That evening, the whole camp gathered in the golden light. The fences shimmered in the distance, but no one looked at them. Horses were saddled, reins handed out, laughter echoing across the field. Frida swung on a Willow's back one last time. She felt the familiar rhythm, the creak of leather, the heartbeat beneath her knees, and suddenly realized she had never felt freer than as a prisoner in Texas. Sergeant Miles stood by the gate, arms crossed. "Make it count," he said. Sam rode beside Frida, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. The line of riders, women and cowboys both, moved together into the open field, hooves drumming against the red earth. Dust rose in clouds, glowing in the dying light. For once, there was no rank, no nation, only motion. The camp's American flag rippled above them, its edges frayed by sun and wind. Someone began humming, a tune no one recognized, half German, half Texan, carried by the rhythm of hooves. Laughter mingled with tears. Even the colonel, watching from the sidelines, couldn't bring himself to stop it. As the riders turned toward the horizon, the sunset flared crimson and gold. Frida looked to Sam. "Willow will miss you," she said softly. "That horse only listens to you," he answered. She shook her head. "No, she listens to kindness." When they reached the ridge beyond the camp, Frida pulled her horse to a stop. Below them stretched the valley, the barns, the barracks, the wire fence glowing faintly in the light. It looked smaller from here, almost harmless. Sam dismounted beside her. "You'll forget this place," he said, trying to sound casual. She looked at him, eyes glinting. "Do you forget the first time something changes you?" The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of mesquite and hay. He wanted to say more, to tell her that she had changed how he saw everything. Duty, mercy, even the meaning of victory. But words felt clumsy next to silence. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a worn brass spur, its edges dull with age. He pressed it into her hand. "For luck," he said, "or memory." Her fingers closed around it. "Then you'll have to trust I'll bring it back." The sun slipped below the ridge, leaving only a streak of gold along the clouds. The riders turned back toward camp, their shadows stretching long across the earth. By the time they dismounted, the sky had gone indigo. No one spoke. The colonel gave the order to prepare for departure at dawn. That night, the barracks glowed faintly with lamplight. The women didn't sleep. They wrote letters they would never send, braided hair, shared silence. Frida sat by the window, holding the brass spur, tracing its worn edge. Outside, she could hear the horses shifting restlessly, the low murmur of guards, the creak of the fence wire, familiar sounds she already missed. At dawn, trucks lined up by the gate. The women climbed aboard, their few belongings clutched close. Frida turned once more toward the stables. Sam stood there, hat in hand. Their eyes met across the yard, a distance both endless and heartbreakingly small. He lifted his hand in a half-salute, half-wave. She smiled, just enough to break something inside him. As the truck rumbled forward, the horses neighed loudly, hooves striking against the fence as if protesting her departure. The rising sun caught on the barbed wire, turning it silver. Frida leaned against the window, whispering to herself, "Maybe mercy travels farther than we think." The convoy disappeared into the horizon. The camp fell quiet. In the corral, Willow stood motionless, staring after the dust clouds until they faded. Sam approached slowly, laying a hand on her mane. The horse snorted, restless, then lowered her head. Behind them, Sergeant Miles walked up, hands in his pockets. "They're gone," he said simply. Sam nodded. "Yeah." Miles studied him. "You think she'll come back?" Sam didn't answer right away. He looked toward the empty road, the heat already rising off the dirt. "If there's any justice left in this world," he said, "she already has." The wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats across the plains, soft, rhythmic, and fading. For a moment, it sounded like memory itself, riding home.